So, it's a very long story, and I'm going to try to keep it very short. But when I was I left school, I lived in the outskirts of Glasgow in Scotland. Sometimes it's considered a bit of a rough city. It was then, now it's famous for culture, but I grew up in the outskirts of Glasgow. And it's funny, we all went to school, and the way the culture was at the time was we never kind of realized we were there for an education. Going to school was just something you had to do. And so we went to school, and most of us left school not knowing what we wanted to do. Even in that school, religious education was more about that we shouldn't abuse solvents, we shouldn't, take intoxicants, we shouldn't get engaged in all kinds of really bad activities, rather than it being anything progressive about spirituality. So when I left school, I remember my father was really upset with me. My father's a good Catholic man. He was the principal in a school. He said to me, "What do you want to do when you leave, George?" And I said, "Dad, I want a job where I don't have to think." And he was so broken-hearted. Anyway, I kind of graduated into a culture of gangs, which was the way it was in our district. There was a different gang for every territory, and most young men had to be a member of those gangs. So I got really caught up in this requirement to be part of a gang culture. And it was very, very turbulent period of my life. And a lot happened during that time. And I remember a turning point for me was when one of my close friends, when these gangs would clash, one of my close friends was attacked by a guy with a carpet knife. And he was cut up so badly, he had 162 stitches all over his body. It was like big snakes all over him. And I watched him lying in the street, and his blood was running down into the public drain. And when he survived that, and following that, everybody was starting to use heavier weapons as part of this culture. And anyway, when the person who did that to him spent some time in prison, when he came out of prison, I met him. I was in a bar, and he came in and he sat at the table next to me. And when I went to the bathroom, a relative of mine came in and said, "This guy wants to know if you're still part of this, because he's sitting there with a hammer, and he wants to know if there's any issue." And at that moment I thought, I'm going to die if I remain part of this scene. So I kind of managed to move on from that, but then it turned into a whole other scene of drug culture and drug abuse. And during that time I worked with a friend. One day he came into work and he said, "I'm leaving." I said, "You're leaving? Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to join a commune." And I was like, "A what?" He was like, "A commune. I'm going to join a commune." And I said, "What's a commune?" And he said, you won't understand." And he took out a book. And now I know it was a science for self-realization. There's a picture of Prabhupada in the front like this. And I just saw this kind of like, I didn't know where this man was from, but he was wearing like a blanket, and he had huge big earlobes. And I thought, that's pretty bizarre. And he gave me the book, and he walked into the boss's office and he said, "I'm leaving, I'm going to join a commune." And the boss was like, "What?" And he just walked out the door. So he obviously went off to join the Hare Krishnas. So anyway, I went home and I threw the book in the cupboard. Sometime later, still this turbulent period of my life, he came back again, and he came to my house to visit me. I had a bit of a reputation in my neighborhood, and here's this guy coming, wearing like a bed sheet, and and with this thing in the back of his head. I couldn't figure out what it was, like this hair in the back of his head. And he came and he was sitting talking to my mother. And when I saw it, I said, "Come up to my room, come up to my room." And he came up to my room, he sat there and he started trying to explain Krishna consciousness to me, and I couldn't understand a word. All I remember is he was talking about a frog in the well. I didn't even know what that was about at the time. It just wasn't part of my vocabulary at all, and neither was it my interest. So off he went, and I just kind of thought, well, anyway, he's doing his own thing, peculiar as it is. And he left again. So the guys I was hanging around with, they were all cooling down in terms of all of that violent stuff. They were all smoking pot, they were taking, and then started taking LSD. And at that point, I was just so dissatisfied with life. I remember sitting in a conversation with a bunch of guys in a bar thinking, every single thing that we do is toxic. Everything we do for pleasure is killing us. And we're all going to be dead. Now, 3 of my friends were killed during that period of life. You know, one guy, his friends kicked him to death to steal £30 off him. It was a gyro, his unemployment benefit. Another guy was stabbed several times. You know, so they were like, you know, this is just, where does this end? You know, it was a terrible scenario. So in pursuit of trying to understand more of life, that was our thing with taking intoxicants at that point. That we need to understand that there must be something for us. There must be. This can't be life. And so then I remember the next time I saw the Prabhupada's books was, I was in my friend's flat. We called it a flat. In America they call it an apartment. And we were all there. And we were all smoking. I hope my mother's not going to see this, by the way. We were all smoking cannabis, as they say. But there was a pile of these books, you know, and they were all the small books of Hare Krishna that somehow this same guy had sent to this other person. And so I remember that we were looking at the pictures of the half man, half lion, the half naked, the naked person, and then becoming a tree, and the greedy person becoming a hog, and we had no concept of karma or reincarnation. All we were thinking was, how can a man become a pig? It has never happened. You know, how can a man become a bear? This is never, these people, this is crazy, you know. But what we were doing was, we were ripping the covers of Prabhupada's books for the cardboard. You won't know any of these things, but we used to put it at the end of the thing we were smoking. As a roach, she called it, you know. It was to help you smoke the joint. So we're ripping the books to make a roach for the joints and smoking Prabhupada's books. Some people say, how do you come to Krishna Consciousness? I used to joke, not by reading Prabhupada's books, by smoking them. So, anyway, that was the next contact with those books. But we never really penetrated them. We never really got into understanding them deeply. But then what happened was myself and another friend very close to me since I was 5 years of age. He was George, and I was also George. We had the same name as well. The two of us were so determined to be free of the culture that we were living as part of and to find some meaning to life, some value, some purpose. We were taking LSD as a means towards finding that. So we would take it and we'd sit facing each other in the lotus position. And we were chanting, I am you and you are me. I am you and you are me. And I remember one time, this famous evening for the two of us, you know, we were completely in another world. And we were listening to Pink Floyd and all that kind of stuff. And we were chanting this, when we thought we had died. We thought we were dead. And then I thought I was God and he was the devil. And, you know, and then finally, when the music we were listening to stopped and it clicked off, you know, certainly we realized we weren't dead or we weren't somewhere else. We were still in the room. And we hadn't really gone anywhere. We were just exactly where we were as before. And we looked at each other and almost simultaneously we said to each other, we can't do this alone. We need a guru. We need a teacher. And then we thought, those books. And I got one. And it was the one with Prabhupada and John Lennon on the cover. And whatever it was, I can't remember the title of it. And we looked at it and we said, he's a guru. He's a guru. And from that moment we made our plan to just get out of the lives we were living and to go and find a guru and to find some purpose for our lives. And so that was the kind of watershed moment for the two of us. And from that moment we never ever turned back. George and myself sat together after that, and I was in a relationship and I was in a contract of work. I couldn't leave. I was completely trapped. And George made his plan to go and visit the temple. And there was a temple, we knew it was near Birmingham and down in England. Big temple, it was called Chaitanya College. And so you know, he made a plan. He said, I'll go. I said, you go find out what it's all about and come back and tell me what it is. So he left, and he stayed at the temple for some time, and then he came back. And when he came back, and I listened to the things he was saying, I knew I had to leave. I had to leave everything. And so we'd become vegetarians, and that was a big shock that was a bigger shock for my family than me becoming a Hare Krishna. At that time in the early 80s where I lived, it was like, I remember my whole family standing around me, and I was kind of like coming down from drugs, and they were all like, oh my God, George, you're a vegetarian. You know? And so, anyway, we were vegetarians. And I remember the lady I was living with, committed to, she was becoming completely distraught because I was changing so much. I wasn't drinking anymore. I wasn't hanging around with the same crowd anymore. And you know what? I must tell you, there was a point where there was a lapse. In that early point, I lapsed, and I thought, if I go into this, I'm going to have to leave everything. And so I blocked it out. I just thought, I got to block it. Maybe that was when George had gone to the temple. And at that point, I turned back to intoxication. But every time I was in my house alone, I'd hear this voice in my head. Read the books. Read the books. Read the books. And I remember it troubling me so much that I got dressed up in the old gang outfits that we used to wear, the Doc Marten boots and the half-cast trousers and the jackets and all that kind of stuff, all that regalia, and going out and getting absolutely plastered just to get away from that voice. But when I'd come home again, it'd be like that, read the books. And then one day I just thought, I can't deny this anymore. And I got up, and the girl I was staying with had taken all the books and hidden them because she didn't want me to read them. And I opened the books and I flicked through the Back to Godhead magazines. And I remember seeing that picture from the Gita. It was like of the 5 elements, and it's a body running like this. You know, it's like the universal body of 5 elements. And I looked at that picture, I just thought, man, that's it. That is it. It wasn't like I was extensively reading. It was just that the books in themselves, they weren't answers to my questions, but it was as if they were truths of life. So I then, one day that young lady said to me, you've not changed, you're still on this thing, aren't you? And I just said, I can't deny it, I can't leave it. So then she said to me, why don't you just go? And I said, okay. In that moment I got my bag out. I didn't know what I was throwing in it. Jeans, that, I don't know what Hare Krishnas wore, whatever. I had all kind of trendy stuff. Just threw it in the bag. She took me to the bus stop. I'd never been to England before. I stood at the bus stop and the bus came in, big stagecoach bus. I said to him, are you going to Birmingham? He said, yeah. When I sat down in the bus, the conductor came up to me and he said, it's really peculiar, he said. Unless we have a booking for this town, we never come through here. But for some reason today, we just thought we'd just come through this town. And I was like, oh my God, these Hare Krishnas, or Krishna's he's got a whole network going on here. He's controlling everything, you know. It's probably the drugs still that was affecting me. But I got to the temple, and I remember walking through the threshold of the big gate. And when I walked in, I was just like that fish, just landing back in the water again. And there I felt value, I felt meaning, I felt purpose. I began to excel like I'd never excelled in my life. And that was it. That's how I came to Krishna Consciousness. It was just something you had to do. And so we went to school, and most of us left school not knowing what we wanted to do. Even in that school, religious education was more about that we shouldn't abuse solvent. So, it's a very long story, and I'm going to try to keep it very short. But when I was I left school, I lived in the outskirts of Glasgow in Scotland. Sometimes it's considered a bit of a man. He was the principal in a school. He said to me, what do you want to do when you leave, George? And I said, Dad, I want a job where I don't have to think. And he was so broken-hearted anyway. I kind of graduated into a culture of gangs, which was the way it was in our rough city. It was then, now it's famous for culture, but I grew up on the outskirts of Glasgow. And it's funny, we all went to school, and the way the culture was at the time was we never kind of realized that we were there for an education. Going to school, we shouldn't, take intoxicants, we shouldn't get engaged in all kinds of really bad activities, rather than it being anything progressive about spirituality. So when I left school, I remember my father was really upset with me. My father's a good Catholic